On my very first day stepping into the city office, I wasn't just looked down on. I was mocked, whispered about behind my back, and some even placed bets that I would quit in less than a week. They thought I was just a country girl, naive and clueless about this world. But what they didn't know was that this very country girl would soon make the entire office bow their heads and even cost someone their career just for daring to mess with me. Sounds crazy, right? A rural girl, with a thick countryside accent, becoming the one to take control of an entire office full of people who once ridiculed her. And what I'll never forget is the moment there I realized, far too late, that I wasn't the prey. I was the predator. If you're curious about what happened, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now. I was born in a rural village that most people only recognize on a weather map. My entire childhood was tied to rice fields, muddy roads, and nights studying by the dim light of an oil lamp during power outages. Sounds a little funny, doesn't it? While other kids grew up with iPads and English tutoring classes, all I had was an old radio, and a dream of leaving a place nobody believed could ever produce success. The day I got accepted into a big company in the city, my whole village treated me like a phenomenon. People whispered that my life was about to change, but some bet that I would be crushed by the cunning and ruthless city people. Do you think they were right? The office I stepped into was nothing short of a battlefield. Everyone wore designer clothes, spoke in complicated jargon, and measured their worth by how fancy they looked. And me. I only had a cheap shirt from the market, and shoes so worn out the soles were about to fall apart. What do you think would happen when a country girl sits next to people who think of themselves as the elite? From the very first day, I became their joke. A glance, a smirk, a mocking comment. All of it felt like hidden knives behind a polite facade. And in that moment, I realized I had no way back. I would either be devoured by them, or I would turn those very people into prey. Which side would you choose? On my second day at work, I walked into the office and immediately heard giggles behind my back. Someone mocked me in a fake country accent. Wow, it's my first time in the big city. The whole group burst out laughing like I was some kind of free comedy show. Have you ever been turned into a joke just because you were different? At lunch, I sat quietly in the corner. Then suddenly someone shouted, "Hey, watch out, the country girl brought her leftover rice." I froze. Inside my lunchbox was nothing more than some rice and a fried egg. Yet the entire table laughed hysterically as if they were watching a game show. Can you believe they even pulled out their phones to record it? Another time, when I asked about a work process, a coworker looked me up and down before sneering. In the countryside you probably only know how to feed chickens, office work is way too hard for you. That one sentence made the whole room erupt in laughter. And me, I felt like 1,000 knives had stabbed straight into my heart. What would you have done then, fight back or stay silent? They treated me like a clown. But deep inside, I swore to myself, I would not stay silent forever. I would make them pay for every smirk, every cruel laugh. And they would never see it coming the day they'd be humiliated themselves. Do you want to know how I turned the tables? After days of being mocked non-stop, I actually thought about quitting. Every morning, I had to fight back tears just looking at myself in the mirror. Have you ever felt so terrified of going to work that it felt like walking straight into hell? But then one night, sitting alone in my tiny rented room, I stared at the pile of documents on my desk. And I realized something. If I gave up now, they would be right. They would laugh at me forever. And for the rest of my life, I would just be the country girl who failed in the city. Do you believe that a single moment can change the entire course of someone's life? I started to quietly observe. I noticed that the shiny, glamorous office wasn't as perfect as it seemed. The management system was a mess. Data was constantly filled with errors. Projects were stuck going nowhere. And the strangest part, the very people who mocked me the most were the ones making the biggest mistakes. You think they would still laugh if their own flaws were exposed? Instead of running away, I chose to learn. During the day, I endured the condescending looks. At night, I threw myself into studying everything. Excel, data analysis, management skills. Every formula, every note was like sharpening a weapon. I knew the day of my counterattack was coming. And when that moment arrived, no one would be laughing anymore. If it were you, would you quietly endure and wait for the perfect chance? Or stand up right away? From that day on, my life split into two worlds. By day, I was still the country girl everyone mocked as a joke. By night, I became someone else, a fighter, sharpening weapons in the dark. Have you ever lived two lives at the same time? I pushed myself to study until exhaustion. Excel, data management, presentation skills, analysis, anything I could find online, I devoured. There were nights I studied until my eyes burned and nosebleeds stained my notebook, yet I refused to stop. Sounds insane, doesn't it? But I knew if I collapsed, nobody would pick me up. I began carefully documenting every mistake my coworkers made. Not to strike back right away, but to wait for the perfect moment. Each error they made became a bullet I stored in my secret arsenal. Have you ever had to stay silent just to prepare for the perfect counterattack? Day by day, the flaws in the company's system became clear. And with each passing moment, I became more certain of one thing. At the right time, I would flip the entire game. I wouldn't just silence their laughter. I would force them to admit that the very girl they once mocked was the smartest person in the room. Would you dare to bet on a country girl like me? If you want to know how I turn the tables, don't forget to hit subscribe so you won't miss what happens next. The opportunity came when no one expected it. A high-stakes project worth millions suddenly ran into chaos. The data was a mess, the deadline was only days away, and the entire office spiraled into panic. The very people who once sat back laughing at me were now pale-faced, running around like headless chickens. Can you believe it? Overnight, those so-called city elites showed their true weakness. The boss exploded in anger, slamming the table and demanding someone take charge. The tension was so thick that everyone kept their heads down, avoiding his gaze. Not a single person dared to step up. What do you think I did in that moment? Me, the country girl who had been the office punchline, suddenly raised my hand. The entire room went silent. Some even smirked, thinking I'd lost my mind. But deep down, I knew. This was the moment I had been waiting for all along. The boss stared at me and asked, "Are you sure?" I smiled and nodded. The room erupted into whispers. She doesn't stand a chance. If she pulls this off, I'll kneel. Have you ever had an entire crowd waiting for you to fail? But I didn't care. Because the night before, I had reviewed every single step of the process, and I knew I could do it. I stepped forward, opened my laptop, and started working. All eyes locked on me, shifting from contempt to unease. What they didn't know was that an earthquake was about to hit. I sat in front of the computer screen, feeling like the whole world was watching every single click I made. Every whisper, every mocking glance suddenly turned into fuel that pushed me forward. Have you ever felt like you were cornered, with only one chance left to survive? I opened the chaotic data files. The numbers looked like a nightmare to everyone else, but to me, they were puzzle pieces waiting to be solved. I used Excel to filter out errors, wrote formulas, and restructured the datasets within minutes. What the so-called city experts couldn't fix in days, I resolved with my shaky but determined hands. Do you think someone once laughed at for eating rice and eggs could really turn around an entire project? But I didn't stop there. I built a clean, visualized report, along with an optimized workflow solution. Slowly, every gaze in the room began to shift. Disdain turned into curiosity. Curiosity turned into panic. And panic turned into dead silence. The boss stood behind me, staring at the screen, his face shifting from anger to shock. I could hear the whispers. No way. She actually did it. Can you imagine the moment when the very people who mock you are forced to swallow their own words? I ended my work with a single press of the enter key. The entire system ran smoothly again. And me, the country girl, had just saved the whole office from disaster. The office hadn't even recovered from the shock of me saving the project when something explosive happened. While reviewing the data, I noticed numbers that didn't add up. And it wasn't just an accident. Someone had deliberately tampered with the files to cover up a massive financial hole. Have you ever stumbled upon a dark secret when no one expected it? I froze for a moment, staring at the screen. My heart was pounding, but I knew this was my chance to deliver the fatal blow. I turned to the boss and the entire office and said, "This error isn't a system glitch. It's human." The room fell dead silent. Who do you think started sweating the most? It was the coworker who had mocked me the hardest. He tried to avoid my gaze, but data doesn't lie. I projected the activity log onto the big screen, and every single fraudulent action was laid out in plain sight. Whispers erupted. Some people gasped, others murmured, "Oh my God. It's him." The boss's face turned red as he shot up from his chair and barked, "Explain yourself." The guy stammered, drenched in sweat. And me, I just sat there, smiling. The same man who once turned me into a joke was now being exposed in front of the entire company. Don't you feel a rush of satisfaction when a bully gets crushed by his own dirty tricks? In that moment, I realized this wasn't just a victory. This was a complete reversal of the game. When the truth was finally revealed, the office erupted. The people who had once looked down on me now hung their heads, trembling under the boss's furious gaze. I still remember that moment. The instant mocking laughter turned into suffocating silence. Have you ever waited for the day when those who looked down on you would finally bow and apologize? The boss looked at me and declared, "From today, you will take direct charge of this project." I could hear the collective gulp from the entire room. Those who had once laughed at me were now forced to work under the guidance of the country girl. Isn't that ironic? But I didn't stop there. I proposed a complete overhaul of the workflow, and for the first time, the boss agreed without hesitation. Within just a few weeks, the project succeeded spectacularly, generating massive profits. From being the office joke, I became someone respected by the entire company. Can you believe that someone once treated like invisible could become the center of an entire office? The fraudster was suspended, and I was considered for a promotion. From a mock country girl, I became the brain behind the company's biggest successes. And the moment I walked out of that office head held high, I knew they would never dare to laugh at me again. If you've ever felt underestimated, remember my story. And don't forget to hit subscribe to join me as I share more journeys of turning the tables. Looking back on the journey I've been through, I realized something. It wasn't the city that changed me, but the mocking words that forged me into a stronger version of myself. They once treated me like a joke. But in the end, I became the one holding all the power. Have you ever realized that sometimes your enemies are the greatest motivation to help you grow? I'm no longer the country girl I used to be. I am living proof that your background does not define your worth. An old shirt, shoes about to fall apart. None of that can hide intelligence and determination. And most importantly, silence is not always weakness. Sometimes, staying quiet is just the prelude to a spectacular comeback. The message I want to share with you is simple. If you're being underestimated or mocked, remember. The disdainful glances of today can become the applause of tomorrow. If a girl from the countryside, once laughed at by an entire office, can turn the tables, then so can you. Are you ready to turn your pain into power? Stand up. Don't run away. Because sometimes, it's in the darkness that you find your own light. And one day, you will tell the story of your own victory, just like I'm telling mine to you right now.